Another edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by thelines.com. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined as always by the great Justin Perri. You can follow him on X at Justin Perri 8, shot quality college basketball analyst, also now part of Hoops HQ. Happy Valentine's Day to you and your favorite college basketball picks this weekend. Justin, you and I were talking about this off air really quickly before we get started on a massive college basketball slate for Saturday, February 15th. But speaking of Valentine's Day, how do you tell your significant other, we might need to shift around plans because I'm parked in front of the couch all day or all night on Friday, maybe for Indiana, UCLA, and then all day, all night on Saturday?
Yeah, for me, Friday is never really a day that can be super available just because there's so much work to be done. Essentially, half of the week occurs in college basketball on a Saturday. So it means there's a lot of prep. So I have a nice Sunday night dinner reservation. I have, it's a nice place, an impressive reservation that I got. We're going upstate to get out of the city for a minute, which is always nice. And look, I mean, you gotta take the wins where you can get them. Yeah, your college basketball analyst boyfriend might not be fully available on February 14th, but Christmas, you got an anniversary place at the right time, super available. So no, it's definitely a balance, and hopefully you have someone in your corner who understands that balance. But no, tonight it's going to be a busy night of nose pressed to the grindstone, deep in the weeds, making sure to get every angle covered for tomorrow.
If you're a degenerate just betting on the games, you could still use the same excuse as Justin or myself. No issues there. I told Justin this. My wife said we have our wedding video, so we're going to watch it Saturday night. And I said, well, I was going to say, I said no chance. I didn't say that. I was a little more precautionary in that sense. But either way, I was able to wiggle out of that video session, and we're going to save it for Sunday night, just like your dinner
There you go.
reservation. So
There you go.
Justin and I on the same page for Valentine's Day weekend. Hopefully you can get on the same page with your significant other. But I digress. Moving over to Saturday, the biggest game arguably of the college basketball season, tipping off at 4 p.m. Eastern, at least so far. Number 1 Auburn at number 2 Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Alabama, the only line we have available as of Friday morning, opening as a 1.5 point home favorite. Makes sense because Auburn would be a 1.5 point favorite on a neutral, with home court advantage being around 2.5, 3 for the biggest home court edges in the sport. Total of 172.5, not as high as what we saw in Kentucky, Alabama a few weeks ago. That one opened at 178.5. Alabama 30th nationally in three-point attempt rate. We know Nate Oates always wants to win the shot volume battle, and over their last 7 games, shooting over 41% from deep, 41.3% from 3 to be exact. Justin, does that three-point efficiency continue against Auburn? Because to me, that's the key to the game.
It is the key to the game. And again, like what Coach Oates has done for so long is just be above 46.5% for 5 straight years in terms of 3-point attempt rate. It's almost every other shot for almost half a decade. And this is not just an aberration. It's a commitment to the bit in the highest order. And it's not just a bit. It is the most efficient way to play college basketball until someone changes the rules, because that's just how valuable the 3-point shot is. Look, the shot quality data showing that Auburn right now has done very well in defending the 3, to the point that they are allowing a rate 5 percentage points lower than what shot quality is expecting so far in SEC play. So if you believe that, maybe that's luck, and you've been watching these Auburn games, they're not closing out too well, then yeah, I think there's a real chance that Alabama can hit all these shots. That's not really a problem I have believing. Auburn currently allowing 29th percentile shot selection allowed, which is 12th best on defense in the SEC. That is just not what you want to be doing when you're about to run into the buzzsaw that is this offense. The thing is, though, is that in terms of the average expected make percent off the dribble on the 3 is right around 33%, and catch and shoot is right around 33% too. But it's not happening. So based on the space that they're giving opponents, you would expect them to be like really good at defending, and but it's been a little bit iffy. So I'm a little concerned. I think that they should do okay. My biggest lean in this game, Eli, I tell you right now, is going towards that under. So less points than, like you said. I do think this is, and it's not a model edge for me. It's really just a lot of knowing how these games go. Every time you have games that have this championship air, you do get a little bit of that slowdown. Every basket matters a little bit more. The shot quality data does kind of point to it in a sense of like calling a spade a spade. Both these teams have a shot quality over of like of a lot higher. So we do kind of look at how the bet results go. So the over under record, both these teams per shot quality right now is 14-10. SQ expects an 18-6 and a 17-7. So these games expected to be going over again and again. In actuality, it might just be that the defense is better than expected on average, and you might continue to see that defensive number be better than what people think, even amongst this clash of the best offenses, the best offensive player, the best offensive scheme. I think defense could actually win out, and the under is the smartest play here.
Yeah, interesting angle there. So we look at Auburn. I mean, their winning streak was snapped
Right.
last weekend against Florida, but still one of the most dominant teams in college basketball on the surface. One thing I found interesting, and a couple other notes here for the game, but just tipping it off with defense. And like you mentioned, Auburn's drop coverage, especially with Janai Broome, because Dylan Cardwell can guard 1-5. Janai Broome really can't. So he tends to play more drop, and that's where Alabama took advantage in the first meeting last season, especially Mark Sears when he got switched onto Broome. But back to my original point, paper tiger factor on Haslametrics. And I'm not calling Auburn a paper tiger in any sense of the imagination.
Yeah.
Right. But this metric indicates whether a team performs better than expected against above average competition. I found it interesting. Alabama ranks well above the Division I average, which you would expect when you look at their results this season, riding a 7-game win streak to boot. Auburn slightly below the Division I average. That's telling to me. Just when you go back to the Florida game, Houston, they dominated at the beginning of the season, but you could argue the Cougars were still working in some key parts, including replacing Jamal Shedd at that point. You and I handicapped that game going back to the beginning of November. I think it's a worthwhile discussion point. I'm not saying Auburn's going to get blitzed tomorrow, but their level of play against upper tier competition in SEC play, going back to the Florida game last week, they were down by double digits for most of that second half, reminded me a bit of the Kentucky game going back to last season when Kentucky went to Auburn and won that game by around a 7 or 9 point margin, just like Florida. And then I brought this up on the show earlier in the week. Auburn's struggles on the defensive glass continue. Vanderbilt had 16 offensive rebounds, so that's now 8 of their last 9 games where they've allowed double-digit offensive rebounds. This is a trend that wasn't an issue for them in non-conference in the beginning of SEC play. Now it's reverse course back to last season. And Alabama could generate their fair share of offensive boards.
They can, and then, you're saying that they're struggling against this higher end competition, and I think we see it in the data a little bit in terms of their struggle against isolation plays on defense, right? And so when you go up against that high level competition, it's very correlated to having high level talent and players who can, get their own bucket, create their own shot, where, maybe teams don't rely on assist rates as much. And so when you have those ISO possessions, Auburn is very bad. 0.93 expected points per possession, which is above a 5% shooting rate. And again, it's not like they're dead last, but in conference, they're one of the worst. And even in the nation, I mean, outside the top 200, defending isolation on expected points allowed. If someone needs a bucket late and they end up in an ISO look, off the mid range, and you have a problem defending it, that lets teams stick around. That's why, it looked like Vandy was about to cover. They didn't. It was a little disheartening, but there's real reason, I think, to go against Auburn, especially in the spread. When you get a big one, Alabama's a little different. So maybe tread a little differently here with this being the highest rated game on KenPom for the entire year. I clicked through the entire year. There's only one other game that gets above an 89 thrill score, and I think it's Alabama, Florida coming up in a couple weeks. So this is a 91.9 or something. This game is going to be great. It's a clear your schedule type of game. And again, I think when you have that type of public excitement for a game and two big forces clashing, I'll take the under on principle, and I think the data points to it as well.
All right, no play for me, but Justin, like he said, an edge intuition wise to the
A little bit of
under.
both.
And
A little bit of both. I'm
yeah,
not really. I
no,
mean, I mostly do spreads. So really, whenever I go into a total, it's a little less certain and a little less verified for me. But I still like to take them every once in a while.
let's move on to another SEC game. Like Tuesday's show, we have a ton of SEC matchups to discuss among our 7 college basketball best bets, or at least topics here on Beat the Closing Number for Saturday, February 15th action. Next up, number 15, Kentucky at unranked Texas. KenPom has this one projected at Kentucky -1, but I would say Texas is going to open up as at least a short favorite, just with Lamont Butler dealing with a shoulder injury. He's expected to be out not only this game, but for the foreseeable future. And same deal with Jackson Robinson, Kentucky's second best three-point shooter behind Kobe Bryant, dealing with a wrist injury. Both of those guys probably out about 2 weeks. I really like Texas in this spot. Kentucky still ranks 18th in the country in opponents' three-point efficiency, just under 30%. Shot quality, as you well know, Justin, has this one closer to 34%. So they're due, I'm going to use the D word, due for a lot of defensive regression still at this point on Valentine's Day. So maybe the love life not going too good for Kentucky on Saturday night. Texas ranks 10th in adjusted offensive efficiency in SEC play. But Texas, the Longhorns have arguably played the toughest SEC schedule when you look at strength of schedule in the conference. According to Carl Ravitch, as you heard probably this week, Justin, the league is about 500 since the beginning of conference play. So I don't know what you want to make of it. Just kidding. But Trey Johnson, Jordan Pope, Julian Larry, all due for their fair share of three-point positive variance here when you look at their historical numbers. Not that those always come back to earth in a positive sense in this case, but they're all traditionally much better shooters dating back to their 2 or 3 years in college. Johnson, a freshman, obviously, but he's shooting around 39% on the season, down to 32% in conference play against this vulnerable Kentucky defense, even though the three-point efficiency on the surface doesn't show it. I think Johnson gets going. Longhorns also have a ton of motivation in this spot at the Moody Center. Right on the bubble, especially after getting blown out by the aforementioned Alabama Crimson Tide earlier in the week. So I will be taking Texas as a short home favorite on the open. What say you, man?
I'm with you. I think this is the way you got to play it if you're going to. As in, I think right now, I think when I texted you, I said strong lean, right? Strong lean to Texas. And that's where I'm at. I think this is a good spot to go against Kentucky coming off of an expected loss to Tennessee for the second time this season. They won the first game on the road, right? Like by 5, and they were expected to lose by 14. They won the second game this past week by 11, and they were expected to lose by 3.
Shout out to you though for picking Kentucky.
Thank you. No, it was a good spot. It was a good spot, and there was a lot of things sort of pointing to a potential hot shooting night, right? And it's definitely hard to handicap towards like when teams are going to get hot or not, but you can. I think I do a hybrid of trying to predict that while also understanding where like the baseline, the median is to give myself like an edge in like both ways, but I think in this spot, coming off of the Tennessee game that they were expected to lose, I think that's going to look a lot like what happened in the Arkansas game where they lose and they're expected to win, right? This is a tough game. This Texas team is not going to make anything easy for them, especially on the road. There's definitely like some blue blood rivalry here for sure, right? This is a pretty marquee matchup in the name of college sports. A little bit of a difference in terms of clashes of styles. Kentucky likes to go a little fast. I think Texas slows them down a bit. But at the end of the day, Kentucky's been lucky. Like you said, a lot of that 3-point variance jumps off the screen to me. And also Texas in the conference shooting 4% colder than expected in conference play, 7% colder at the rim in conference play. So that's very significant, especially the rim percent. If they have a nice day at home in their comfort of their own gym at the rim, get a couple of those good English bounces to roll home. Yeah, I think this is a great spot to get in on Texas in terms of, and then Kentucky expected to see some regression in their shooting in conference as well. Not a lot, not crazy, but enough where you're like, okay, they've definitely been hot. They're coming off of a hot shooting night. Now going on the road. I think this is where you want to grab Texas in a spot. Like you said, they've had a very tough schedule. Now, maybe it's not like any part of the SEC gauntlet gets easy. But, coming up, what do they finish with? They finish with like South Carolina, Arkansas, Georgia, Miss State, Oklahoma. That sounds pretty easy compared to where they have just come out of, which is Alabama, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, LSU, Mississippi, Texas A&M, Missouri, Florida. Oklahoma, Tennessee, Auburn, Texas A&M. So yeah, they are at the back nine, a relaxing back nine. I'm guessing they probably feel pretty good. It's a tough conference. They get this win and they can look forward to a maybe sneaking a win on the road against South Carolina, only maybe lose 1 or 2 games the rest of the season. This is a big spot for them. I think you want to take, especially if you're scared of like the -1.5, which is fair. You could take a money line, but I think you lay the spread. Trust it.
Yeah, if this opens -1.5, I'll probably just grab the -120 just to your initial line of thought. But yeah, I agree with you. If you want to take -110,
Nah,
minus
I
one
think
and a half.
I personally always, it's bit me plenty. It's bit me plenty, but I always optimize for price in college basketball just because of how crazy it is. I'd rather pay like the -105 versus a -120, even if it's a point and a half. Again, if it's a 1-point game, you know what? I'll throw my hands in the air and shrug. But like, how many times is that really going to happen? It's going to happen a lot less than losing the 15 cents. Look, it's strategy, but that's
Yeah,
and I've eaten a couple of hooks this week, but that's life.
that is life. That's sports betting in a nutshell for you.
In a
But
nutshell.
back to Lamont Butler, because
Mm.
he is the key to Kentucky, to me at least. Andrew Carr, a healthy Andrew Carr. You can make the case. Amari Williams, very important piece just in terms of him being a 5 and a point guard at that,
Yeah.
a floor spacing big that can pass the ball at his level of efficiency. But Butler, his net rating on off splits per CBB analytics in the 91st percentile. He is so instrumental to what Kentucky wants to do. Probably their best on-ball defender, on and off-ball
Yeah.
defender, and that comes from his days at San Diego State under Brian Dutcher. So his importance and lack of no Butler in this game for Kentucky is going to be a very pressing issue for them, especially defensively against a Texas team that, like we both touched on, is due for their fair share of positive aggression from deep.
Good bounces. They haven't gotten many. And again, it's not that they're due. I think sometimes we look at it the wrong way. It's not. It's both, right? Because it's a duality. It's not only are these teams due, but they're improperly priced because of the unlucky occurrences that have already happened. So it's not even like, oh well, it's because that they're going to regress. It's actually more that they've gone off the expected path so much that the price is wrong. That even if they don't, that you should still be getting at least a fair shake. And if it does, you're getting a serious advantage. So it's not only about the expected should start happening, it's that the unexpected has been happening, and that's affecting the price you're getting today. So it's there's two sides to the coin. So I think, and that's important because it's not wrong to say do, because essentially you're saying that implicitly implied part of it.
Right. And that's another just side note for a second. Interesting conversation. If Texas gets bet up, they will get bet up in this game. Let's say
Probably.
they get bet up to -3, -3.5. Similar to a Texas Tech Iowa State spread when in the beginning of conference play in the Big 12, the Red Raiders opened plus 1.5, closed 3.5. They end up losing in
Mhm.
overtime, didn't hit free throws down the stretch in regulation to close out the Cyclones. But there are going to be bettors that say, okay, according to my model here, injuries be damned for Kentucky. This line is too high, despite
Right.
the fact that Texas's 3-point shooting splits against a Kentucky defense that has gotten their fair share of positive variance lines up very well. I'm still going to take the 3.5. I
Yep.
would argue my line of thought always in those situations, especially with a spot like this, you bet Texas up to a certain point, maybe under the key number of 3, and
Yeah.
then you stay away. You don't go back to the other side.
No, I mean, well, yeah, it would
I
just take
don't.
it. Well, it would just take way too much, right? And you don't because it would take too much. Like I would, but you would have to move 6 points, like for real. Like there's unless, yeah, no, it would be very tough. It's very very unlikely for me to ever middle a game pre-flop. I don't think it's happened at all this season. You don't your edge. I would argue that you need to rethink your edge if you're betting, pre-flop college basketball lines because of a couple of points movement. Like, just don't do that. It's just not, you're not that accurate. Or that, or you'd be on a beach.
Exactly. All right, man, let's keep it rolling here. Over to the Big Ten. We're splitting up the SEC conversation. Early tip on Saturday. Number 16, Wisconsin at number 7, Purdue. The Boilermakers projected to be 4-point home favorites. I found this fascinating going back to the Michigan game on Tuesday, and you had Purdue. I think you had them, 2.5? So you covered
Yeah,
that.
by the hook. Yeah.
Yeah, the hook went your way in that sense. Going back to the matchup, Purdue spent 14 minutes and 16 seconds of game time in the second half, one foul short of reaching the bonus. That's the longest a power conference team has had to wait for foul number 7 this season by nearly a minute, and also the
Wow.
only time a team waited 6+ minutes in both halves. So Michigan, from a foul standpoint, got pretty lucky, and Ant Wright, who does a really good job, former college basketball player, just breaking down things from a video perspective. Second half, 20 total missed calls, 15 missed calls against Purdue, just 5 for Michigan. So I think Purdue got the wrong end of the shake, and you could argue Purdue should have won the game outright.
I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and complain. My bet paid the same regardless. But yeah, that was. I mean, thankfully they stormed back, but it was a tough watch. And again, that's part of college basketball. I mean, you could make the same complaints about my St. John's Red Storm and the game that and with that, but you want to know what? Rick Pitino came out and said what everyone should think about basketball. You shouldn't give the refs a position to impact the game, impact the spread. Good teams don't, right? They definitively win. They make it to their errors so that the imbalances of the game, it doesn't make a dent in the final results. So you could sit there and complain, or you can just understand that's the way college basketball is, and that you're more likely than not to see it even out over time than have things be plotted against you to the point that you're going on Twitter and saying that you think Vegas has conspired to, ruin your 2-dime bet at most. No, they have not.
How about a
And most
$2 bet? Because there
Right.
are
Oh,
people that
I'm
complain
being
about that too.
so I was generous. I'm being very nice, Eli, to the people that do this because I that's the limit to where I would start to complain because again, there's so much money involved, obviously, and there's so much more at stake than conspiring to have an under or an over hit. And are there, of course, spread aware players and coaches and all that stuff? Sure, but like on both sides, everyone wants to win and you just have to trust it long term and again you're probably going to run into like 17-20% of college basketball games having crazy things that happen in your favor and 17 to 20% of them that happen against your favor, and the goal is to really just stay hyper focused on that 60% of games where nothing crazy happens, where you actually have a chance for your edge to come home in a fair fight, and you just hope the rest evens out and you pay some juice on it, but that's the game. And if you don't like the game, don't play the game, but don't get mad at the game. Don't hate the player, right? So again, that's Purdue. That's what's going to happen. There's going to be games in every team season that are lost or won because of for lack of a better term, BS, right? And you might get some lucky BS, you might get some unlucky BS. I mean, I saw a game where Elon covered against Monmouth on like a -9 because of like some crazy flagrants. I've seen points go into the bucket after the final horn has sounded. They put time back on and they hit a buzzer beater. You won your last your Indiana bet on Magic. So it's someone's on the other side of all this stuff. So
Anthony Leal would not
I mean,
consider that magic.
I but someone's on the other side of that stuff, right? So
Yeah.
like it's all going to come around. You can't get too upset about it in either way, because it's just going to cloud your process in the games where you can win without the BS. So
And don't
and
chase. That
right,
that's the,
don't.
that's the other thing.
And
When you
also
when you
BS is bad stuff, by the way, just for all the kids watching at home gambling. Um, but yeah, don't chase, don't get upset about it. Just gotta take it on the chin. The best gamblers take losses on the chin and don't stagger, don't go down, because guess what? A fighter who staggers, when they get back up staggering, it's usually over. There's never a really good getting up, staggering and dazed and going back into the ring, your hands half up. No. Stay focused, make sure that you're poised and you keep that steel jaw, and you will do much better.
love it.
All right.
Justin on his soapbox, presented by Shot Quality. Let's keep it back to the conversation with Purdue, Michigan.
Sure, sure, sure.
So my take on the foul issue wasn't necessarily, and it was a good conversation for sure, wasn't necessarily okay. You miss calls happen. Motivationally speaking, Purdue coming back home after that loss, Purdue hasn't lost, I don't think, back to back games this season. So you could argue maybe the D word applies to them there, just if you think intuitively and if you care about that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, if you
yeah,
care about it.
motivationally, this one really favors Purdue to me, just off of that loss. Also, you look at Wisconsin's wins in Big Ten play. Iowa twice, Rutgers, Minnesota, Ohio State, you could argue tournament team, so okay. USC, Nebraska, tournament team, but their win over Nebraska was during the Cornhuskers 6-game losing streak.
Mm-hmm.
Northwestern, when they didn't, for the first time, have Brooks Barnheiser all season. And
Right.
Indiana. How is Wisconsin, like, Wisconsin to me is overrated in the betting market, and that's a
Yes.
byproduct a little bit of their AP ranking to an extent. Not that the betting market cares about that, but you look on a game by game basis, didn't cover at Maryland. That game was around 5.5. I made it closer to 7. I ended up betting Maryland live, not patting myself on the back. But Wisconsin, my point
Good
is,
pick.
against upper tier competition, especially with their drop coverage. I mentioned that with Auburn. Wisconsin runs a hell of a lot more drop with Crowell and Winter. And Purdue's ball screen offense has the exact formula with Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, whether it's in the mid range or from behind the arc, to take advantage. You also touched on this ahead of the Michigan game. Purdue was due for their fair share of 3-point variance. We'll say variance
Mm-hmm.
instead of regression if you
Positive.
want
Yes,
to.
yes, yes.
Positive
Yeah,
variance.
yeah.
I think that trend, or at least that thought process, should continue in this matchup.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm high on Purdue, but I'm also pretty high on Wisconsin. I mean, I was actually taking a look. I
Oh,
do not super high, but like I think high. I think I'm decently fair on the market. I was doing some research because I do a futures article every Friday for Inside for Hoops HQ now, and we've been building like a small portfolio, and like Wisconsin almost made the cut today, and I didn't go with them just because it's a little cheap, and I wish I could get a little bit more value than like a 20 to 1, 18 to 1 to make the Final Four. Like that's probably too little, but they have done pretty well against top teams in the last couple of weeks. I'm pretty high on UCLA right now. I think that's a team that's probably making the cut in that, futures buy-in, but they covered against that UCLA team. Maryland's been absolutely ripping. I mean, the Big Ten kind of looks okay, right? So if that's the case, then I don't know. I think at this point you have to start looking almost conference to conference and give teams a little bit of credit for that. Like I'm pretty low on the Mountain West. I'm a little higher than most in the Big Ten. And then I think it's hard to be higher or lower than anyone on the SEC. They are the number one It's just hard. And then I'm like, I think I'm pretty market even on Big East. I do know some very sharp people who are low on the Big East, and that's fair. But I am kind of high on the Big Ten, which is weird. But I do think this is a Wisconsin team that can turn it on offensively and also has defensive prowess. So, look, I don't know that they make the Final Four run, but second weekend team, it feels like that. If they don't make the second weekend, that's a big letdown for how good this Wisconsin team is. This is going to be a great game. And whatever the line is, I assume is going to be really sharp. I'd lean Purdue a little bit just because, again, they have maybe struggled. They do have the guard play, the spacing, everything you want. But wouldn't be shocked to see this one kind of be right within that realm. Likely a very, very easy pass for me.
Fair enough. I may be on Purdue if this one opens closer to 4. Maybe the
That's
market
fair.
drifts in Wisconsin's direction. To your point, covered against UCLA. I think marginally one way or the other, just depending on the close and the number you got, did or didn't cover against Illinois going back to the beginning of Big Ten play in December, right. Didn't cover against Marquette, and then lost as a short home favorite against Michigan. That was before Michigan, or maybe the start of Michigan really starting to ascend this season. But Purdue's post-up defense and their post-up denial specifically, 8th percentile in terms of percentage of post-ups faced on Synergy per Synergy, and 94th percentile in post-up efficiency allowed. So that's what Wisconsin wants to do, play through Crowell, play through Winter. Not really a mid-range team, unlike last season with Storr and Hepburn. So I don't think they really match up against Purdue's drop coverage that great, even though Tanji can hit his fair share of mid-range jump shots. But yeah, not a bet for me, but maybe a slight lean to Purdue, just depending on the number. You can check out my bets in our Discord channel over at thelines.com. It's free. All right, man, back to the SEC. Arkansas at number 8, Texas A&M. KenPom projecting this one A&M -8. You are going back to the fade, the Aggies train.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you have stats that point to this type of overperformance, long-term overperformance. It's tough. It is definitely a interesting spot to go ahead and just, trust the data, because time and time again, it points to teams that are maybe doing really well, that look really good, and says, maybe fade them. And again, we have Texas A&M outside the top 30 teams, which is pretty drastic compared to the way that they look to most of the market. So in that sense, yeah, they are one of the luckiest teams in the nation, currently expected to be 12-12 instead of 19-5, a 27.35 record luck. And look, long term, I have seen it again and again. This stuff is right more often than it is wrong. So I'll ride it to the bottom. I'll go down with the ship. Look, I don't think that what we've seen out of the defense for Arkansas is all that great, but in terms of what I see from Texas A&M's defense, they've just absolutely been clobbering everybody at the rim. They look like that no one can score on them. And in SEC play alone, shot quality expecting a near 10% differential between how good they are and how good they're expected to be. So that is a good buy point on anyone coming in against them. Arkansas, Coach Cal, I think has actually done a pretty good job, and they're kind of cold. They're shooting 4% colder than expected from 3, 10% colder than expected from mid-range in the conference. But their defense has been great. So you want to talk about two teams that have maybe been showing who they are a little different than the shot quality. The defense for Arkansas expected to be worse. The offense of Texas A&M expected to be worse. But then on the other side of the ball, I think is where Arkansas is kind of who they are, and then A&M again expected to be worse. So I'll keep going down with it. It's definitely cost me some money, but at some point it's going to turn around, and maybe there's reason to start thinking that I should be like adding more to it so that I recoup my losses. But look, the way it's worked for me this season, if there's a team or two that maybe I've dropped 7 or 8 units on, there's probably a team or 3 that I've won 5 or 6 on to balance it out. So we'll keep riding with it. I do think this is a continued sell point for anyone who believes in what shot quality is doing. The offense in terms of just what they develop in catch and shoot threes is abysmal. Again, it's all red. It's all red expected offense in the conference, but yet somehow everything seems to be going in. eventually they got to have the bad game. It's got to come to a close. Someone's got to figure it out, and we'll be there cashing the bet when they struggle.
If this line opens around 8, I think on the surface I would lean towards the Hogs.
I think it could
Why,
open at. I think it could open 9.5. I think it could open 8.5, 9.5. That's very realistic. We're getting a lot of love for home teams right now.
yeah, Arkansas having the motivation right on the bubble, along with a couple other teams that we talked about so far. So that's big for the Hogs. Turnover issues also haven't been an issue for them, even without Boogie Flan, which is pretty big against Texas A&M's ball pressure. We saw that in the second half against Georgia, where the Georgia Bulldogs, didn't score for 13 plus minutes or 12 plus minutes. Didn't hit a field goal, I should say, in the second half for 12 plus minutes. That was wild, but we'll touch on Georgia here in a bit. So Arkansas's last 4 games, 3 of 4 wins, shooting just under 42% from deep and allowing a 31% 3-point clip. I just wonder, and you could argue A&M shot selection isn't great, so maybe that 3-point percentage allowed continues, but can they continue to hot shooting with a defense that is, to me, the most physical in the SEC? The defenses they've faced of late aren't of that ilk.
Yeah.
So Avicic has been playing very well, and they've been playing very well because John L. Davis is seemingly finally healthier. Maybe he was just shooting poorly. Maybe it was just a mental thing at the beginning of the season, but seems to be a bit of both at this point. Arkansas, an interesting team if they get into the tournament. Can they make a run? Depends on whether you trust Cal or not. I agree. He's been, from a coaching standpoint, I'm a fan of late, and I think the team
a little better, yeah.
Yeah, benefited in a sense from the Flan injury, but I worry about A&M's physicality because I feel like that isn't, and it can't be baked in to shot quality. Shot selection isn't great, but they are so good at generating those second chance opportunities.
Right. Well, it is baked in the sense of how many possessions they're expected to get and their rebound rates and all that stuff, because we do weigh offensive rebound chances and second chance points against expectations. So that your second chance points is a factor of your rebound percent. Your expected second chance point is a factor of your rebound percentage, and then the expected shot percentage of the second shot. Thankfully, we calculate all that stuff very well, and I don't have to deal with it. I just use the numbers. But no, I think, look, you're right. It's an interesting spot. I think that in terms of how you're approaching this, if Coach Cal's figuring it out, I think that's what you have to kind of give some credit towards. I think that right now in college basketball, with the landscape that we have for transfers and coaching changes, it's almost naive to demand success in the first 4 months, let alone first year. I think what's going to happen with Coach Cal next year, I would expect another big step up. We've seen it almost everywhere. It is hard to win in your first year. It is hard to get the guys you want on your team in transfer portal your first year, because you're also moving your staff, moving your life as a coach. Like, there's so much that goes on. So, and then you got to restart building culture, building connections, understanding how, things work. Programs have like little things here and there, travel things, like the way the players are, the way the environments are at the school. Like, I'm more inclined to believe that, the early season performance from Coach Cal is likely going to be seen as a discount in the next month and a half.
If you're betting on Arkansas, you're betting on them to be able to score in transition for a full 40 minutes, because that's what Georgia couldn't do in the second half, because their offense was stagnant, non-existent for much of it. And then they were playing in the half court because of it, because A&M was scoring and then pressuring the ball. And Georgia had about 20 seconds with their inept offense to score, which was not going to happen. But let's keep it moving. Another SEC game. As I touched on, a ton of great matchups. Number 22, Mississippi State, facing off against in-state rival Ole Miss, 19th in the AP poll. KenPom projecting this one, Ole Miss -6. Similar, but conversely, you are going back to Mississippi State, similar to A&M, but you're backing the Bulldogs here, unlike the Aggies.
Yes, yes. So I caught some flack of what gave you the right idea, the great idea of taking Miss State last time out. Same data that's giving me the great idea to take him this time out, to tell you the truth. Mississippi State, man, they are hyper efficient attacking the rim. They don't turn the ball over, but they can't seem to get it to go. That was an expected win over Florida, Eli. That was not just a bad game. It was a very unlucky game. Florida's good. Don't get me wrong. Florida is very good. It's very hard to beat them. But I'm just not really going to sit here and get upset when, a team that's shooting 28% from three in conference continues to do badly. It's how it works. They're not getting lucky. They need some of these shots to fall. I feel like every other year we say Miss State can't hit their shots. Um, but this is where you want to take them. It's scary. It's not great. The shot making isn't good, but they allow the worst shots to opponents on defense, like positively. So, like the best shot selection defensively in the conference, which is a big deal. That's how the physicality kind of can show up in the data, right? They don't foul a lot with the physicality, which is really important. They could definitely use to get to the free throw line. The threes that they take aren't bad. Out of the timeout, they've been good. The rim and three rate allowed on defense is great. They force opponents into the mid range. It seems like Florida hit all those shots. They were expected to allow, 74 points to Florida. They allowed 81. They were expected to score 77. They scored 68. So a little bit of both sides of the stick being burnt. I'll go right back to the well. It doesn't really take much for me to see an expected win against Florida on shot quality score and be like, all right, should probably bet on that team again. if they actually did that, if they ran it back and they won against Florida, and you still got this line, you'd probably feel pretty good about it. So I go in with the essentially believing they did and saying I'm getting this price on a team that beat Florida. All right, let's go. Let's get it. That's it might sound crazy, but guess what? Sometimes you need to be missing a limb and walking a little different to have a different perspective and get an edge.
Yeah. And I was surprised Mississippi State couldn't take advantage of the Elijah
Oh,
Martin and
come
Condon
on.
injuries.
I mean, what? We beat the line by 4 points. I got plus 2.5. They close as a 2.5 point favorite, and I look silly. So it's
They
okay.
opened, by the way, soft opener, 4.5
Four and a
point
half.
dogs.
I know, but I wasn't gonna take a soft line and try to do that and win that battle because I knew even 2.5 was fine.
Yeah.
I was already hearing reports Martin wasn't playing. The market kind of knew, which is why it moved so quickly, and then it moved even more, and then everyone piled on with the superstar not being there, and then of course, obviously, it's the most public play in the world, and they don't even come close. So get back right on them. Get back right on them. I'm telling
Right.
you. Yep.
I'm with you from the standpoint that the shooting, positive variance in the route per se matches up well against Ole Miss's no middle defense because you have to be able to shoot threes against it. The no middle is aimed to prevent dribble penetration. Hubbard's got to go off in this game,
I mean,
but
he's got to
right.
go off in every game, unfortunately.
That's a good point. Mississippi State 10th in SEC play in turnover percentage. And that's what Ole Miss's defense thrives on. Their ball pressure, off of that no middle. When teams try to drive, you double, you trap, and you force turnovers. And that's what Ole Miss does better than arguably any team in the country. Just when you look at especially turnover balance, I love this Ole Miss team for so many reasons going into March. But when you think about creating extra possessions, number one turnover rate in college basketball offensively, so they don't turn the ball over. You have two veteran guards, Sean Padula, Jalen Murray,
It's going to
and
make it hard for Miss State.
yeah, and you force a ton of turnovers. I bet on another. I tacked on a little more Ole Miss futures. You can read that right up over at thelines.com. Final four, 25-1. Probably a stay away game for me. Ole Miss looking for revenge after the overtime loss to Mississippi State on January 18th. Keep in mind, Sean Padula, just 3 of 12 shooting from the 3-point line in that first matchup. Now back at home. I'm looking at probably a no play in this game. If I had to bet it, Mississippi State +6. I expect it to open. What do you expect this line to open at? I kind of think it's going to be closer to 5.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked to see it closer to 5 here. That's what it should open up as, especially the in-state rivalry. I think there's probably going to be some decent action. What, Ken Palm's at 5 as well, or 6?
6, but I still think it's going
Uh,
to shade closer to 5.
I think it might close closer to 5. I think it'll open 6.5.
Okay. Yeah, 6.5. I would at least strong
Maybe even
lean to you
7. I
there.
wouldn't. I wouldn't be shocked to see 7. Again, we're just seeing so much love for home teams. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. A Ken Palm plus 1.5 for the home teams, or minus 1.5 for the home teams. Technically, seems to be essentially how lines are opening. So.
Yeah. Good point. One last SEC game, 2 more games overall. The touchdown number 21, Mizzou at unranked Georgia, the aforementioned disgustingly bad offense that we saw on Tuesday night at A&M. KenPom having this line at Mizzou -1. And going back to that Tuesday loss for Georgia, up 9 at the break, didn't hit a field goal until
Nice.
7:20 left in the second half. Got some free throws in there. And shot quality actually had this one at A&M winning the game by 10. So right around the closing spread of 7.5. Georgia didn't have Dakota LaFew, their starting 2 guard, yet the market moved and closed in Georgia's favor, in our favor. We both got Georgia plus 8.5. It closes
Yeah.
7.5. I think maybe even 7 at one of the sharpest books out there, Circa Sportsbook. Yet they get blitzed in the second half because their offense was incapable of doing anything in the half court against that elite A&M defense. But LaFew reportedly practiced on Thursday. That's huge. Got hurt in practice on Tuesday night when Georgia was having a late night session getting to College Station. He's Georgia's best guard in terms of dribble penetration. And against a Mizzou defense that their perimeter floor spacing just offensively for a second has struggled against more physical competition. Like we saw it against Auburn. We saw it against A&M. They shot 30% from deep against Auburn, 23 against the Aggies last weekend. Georgia's defensive efficiency, 25th per KenPom. And then you look at post-up defense for Mizzou. Georgia ranks in the 82nd percentile in post-up efficiency with Newell and Godfrey, and Mizzou grades in the 11th percentile at defending post-ups. I think this is a do-or-die spot for Georgia's NCAA tournament hopes. Really like the Bulldogs here, whether they're laying a short number on open or catching one pick. I'll be on the Bulldogs, Justin.
I get it. I think I see where you're coming from with it. I've been super infatuated with this Missouri team. I think they've absolutely turned it on. They look like one of the best teams in the nation over the last 3 weeks. It's really hard to go against them. I mean, yeah, they lost to Texas A&M, but that was an expected shot quality win of 17. They lost to Tennessee, but that was an expected shot quality win of 2. They have been cooking. They were expected to lose Mississippi State. Again, my Mississippi State Bulldogs, who I love, and that only contributes to all my other points, thankfully. But they've looked really good, and I'm not really too upset with taking those losses to A&M and Tennessee, especially Tennessee on the road. A&M, yeah, not great. Probably want to get that one. But I think bouncing back against Oklahoma, showing you how ferocious they can be. I do think this is probably a little bit of one of those spots where off that Oklahoma win, where it was a 1 point expected win, now going on the road, we could see them struggle. So I do lean that way with you. I lean Georgia, but this is a very clear, no play to me. I have data, conflicting opinions, both sides.
Last game to touch on here, Mountain West, Boise State at San Diego State, rematch from Saturday, January 4th, where Boise State lost by 8 at home to the Aggies. I believe closed as a right around a 2.5, 3-point favorite in that game. What say you here?
Yeah, this is I got to return the favor here for Boise. I think this is a spot where they go and make some noise on the road. They are one of the teams that I think just has been unable to figure it out for us this season. And honestly, San Diego State continues to overperform. We had them expected to only win by 4 against San Jose State. They only won by 3 on a big comeback. That was like a 9-10 point spread, and San Jose State was missing good players. So a pretty vindicating win for what shot quality has been seeing out of this team. Only barely beat Wyoming, lost to San Jose on the road, lost to Colorado State, expected to lose. I don't know why people keep giving the San Diego State team so much love and credit. I understand that they've had a long success in terms of their defensive prowess, but the only thing they're doing this season that remains is keeping opponents from the rim, and I don't think Boise's really going to allow them to do that. Boise is a steamroller, and I promise you they want to get this dub. It's a big spot for them to do so because, again, this is proof that the Mountain West isn't very good. If Boise does this, I think Boise and maybe Utah State are the only two like actually good teams coming out of this conference this season. I'll be betting on the Blue Broncos to get this one done.
Yeah, really quick for me. If this one opens 3, I'll probably be with you on the Broncos. Degenhart should be able to score in the half court against the San Diego State defense, even if they are keeping him away directly from the basket and Boise State isn't selectively or isn't able to selectively run in transition. Mid-range, maybe not a drop coverage per se, but Dutcher runs like a pack line defense in a sense, trying to keep the ball out of the paint. So Degenhart should have his fair share of mid-range opportunities, and he is arguably Boise State's, and statistically Boise State's most efficient player. But that's going to do it here for this edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by thelines.com. Always appreciate you, man, coming on, hopping on, talking shot quality data and your insight as well. Really great show as always, dude.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. Thanks for having me, and I'll see you again next week. Good luck, everyone, with your bets, and hopefully we all have another fruitful Saturday.
For Justin and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Beat the Closing Number. Check out all of our college betting breakdowns over at thelines.com. So long, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day-ish. Maybe not to your significant other. And good luck on your college basketball picks.